January 1994 in Charlotte County near the central Florida city of Punta Gorda. Two hunters traversing an area known for wild hogs stumble upon a partially decomposed corpse. The discovery of this gruesome scene shocks local law enforcement and shakes the community of the once serene tropical paradise to its core. I'm Art Intel, and this is the case of the Hog Trails Killer. Punta Gorda, Florida is best known for its quiet serenity, but also supports an active nightlife. As the city grew, real estate speculators in the 1980s began a new project to build new residential neighborhoods in the area, which they eventually bailed out of. They leave behind a vast array of paved roads cutting through the vast overgrown wilderness in the suburbs outside the city. The area becomes a favorite hunting spot for locals and becomes known as the Hog Trails.
Contractors came in and started by building the paved roads for the residential plots, but they never built the actual homes. The paved roads left behind make it easy for hunters to get around in the area. The vast overgrowth makes it attractive for hogs to hide and root.
In January 1994, two hunters were tracking hogs in the area when they stumbled upon the remains of a human being partially decomposed in the Hog Trails area. Law enforcement in the area are used to crimes like burglaries, thefts, and domestic disputes. They begin an investigation into the discovery of the corpse, but are faced with numerous challenges from the start.
The Florida climate accelerates the decomposition process, which turns a human body into a skeleton very fast. That makes it hard to determine the time of death. There's no clothing on the body, no personal effects like a ring or a necklace or a tattoo. This makes it very hard for police to identify the person.
The medical examiner finds indications of strangulation. The police begin their search for the victim's identity by looking through missing person reports and dental records. The victim has a pin in their leg, but no records of this type of implant are kept at the time. A 3D rendering is made and help from the public is sought to identify the man. Despite these extensive efforts, the victim's remains are unidentified and he is logged in the case as John Doe number 1. The case then goes cold for 2 years. In January 1996, a man's dog running loose in the suburbs near the Hog Trails comes home with what looks like a play toy in his mouth. Upon further investigation, however, the dog's owner realizes it's a human skull. After the shocking discovery of a second victim, law enforcement officers become deeply concerned and initiate a thorough and meticulous search, combing through the area block by block. This relentless pursuit uncovers additional bones and remains, once again devoid of any clothing or personal belongings. The absence of evidence at the scene strongly indicates that the victim was probably murdered elsewhere and then disposed of in this location. Although the autopsy report fails to yield definitive answers, investigators strongly believe that they are confronting a serial killer. In March 1996, the discovery of a third body again sent shockwaves through the community. The victim had been gruesomely mutilated, bearing unmistakable signs of a brutal murder. Ligature marks encircling a tree at the crime scene hinted at the involvement of a sexually deviant perpetrator. This horrifying revelation ignited the renewed interest in the previous two cases. Striking similarities between the crime scenes emerged. As investigators confronted the chilling reality of these murders, they came to the unsettling conclusion that a serial killer was at large. The news reverberated throughout the community, unaccustomed to such heinous acts of violence. The escalating pressure was mounting on law enforcement to bring the perpetrator to justice and solve the case once and for all.
A profiler named Wayne Porter was brought in to help with the investigation. He suggested they were dealing with a sexual sadist, an individual who gains pleasure from inflicting pain on others. Individuals like this often document their crimes and have a history of sexual deviance.
A statewide task force was formed, bringing together agencies from across the state to help find the killer. In April, another victim was found. This victim had a distinct tattoo that police hoped would make it easier to identify them. A fifth victim was discovered the same month. All had the same strangulation marks. The killer, it seemed, was accelerating their murder spree. Releasing a picture of the tattoo of victim 4 paid off. The police were able to identify him as Kenny Smith, a transient who frequented shelters and worked odd jobs in the area.
When the police identified Kenny Smith as a victim, it narrowed their focus in the case. They now believe that the killer was targeting the homeless and people on the street to prevent them from being easily identified by authorities.
The fifth victim was identified as Richard Montgomery. His mother was questioned and reported that Richard had been offered money to take nude photos just days before his disappearance. She reported that the man offering Richard the job was driving a blue Capri. This further confirmed for authorities that the killer was targeting transient individuals to avoid witnesses, keep the victims nameless. The break police needed in the case came from an inmate serving time for grand theft auto. David Payton contacted authorities and revealed a harrowing incident. Payton recalled a man who approached him to take nude photos of him tied up. The two drove out to an area near the Hog Trails when Payton noticed duct tape, ropes, and a knife in the man's car. Once they stopped, Payton waited for an opportunity to escape and then took off in the man's car. He was later arrested and was serving time for this very crime. This tip led investigators to a man named Daniel Conahan. Conahan had a history of deviant sexual behavior, was in the Navy, and attempted to conduct an exorcism on fellow sailors. An old roommate in Chicago confirmed that Conahan had expressed fantasies about picking up hitchhikers, tying them up, and having sex with them. He moved back to Florida to care for his elderly parents and trained as a nurse. This may be where he skillfully learned to mutilate his victims.
Daniel Conahan exhibited a complex and deeply disturbed personality. His actions demonstrate a convergence of various psychological factors, including sadism, sexual deviance, and a propensity for violence. Conahan's personality can be characterized by a pronounced lack of empathy and a callous disregard for the well-being of others. His ability to lure victims by exploiting their vulnerabilities and promises of compensation suggests a manipulative and cunning nature. Conahan's choice to engage in acts of extreme violence, such as tying up and manipulating his victims, points to a profound disturbance in his psychological makeup, potentially driven by a combination of deep-seated anger, distorted sexual fantasies, and a desire for dominance and control. The complexity of his personality is underscored by his targeting of a specific demographic, indicating a level of premeditation and selectiveness in his crimes.
Police set up 24-hour surveillance on Conahan. He was seen carrying a backpack, which investigators believe contained the tools he used in his crimes. He frequently visited soup kitchens and homeless shelters, further bolstering investigators' suspicions on his method of operation. Conahan was exhibiting the predatory behavior one would expect to see in a cold-blooded killer.
The police had an undercover officer pose as a homeless man in hopes that Conahan would engage him, and it worked. Conahan approached the undercover officer and suggested a photo shoot of the same kind as the prior victims.
The high-risk undercover operation did not pan out, however, as Conahan did not attempt to harm the undercover officer. The cost of such extensive surveillance led the police to abandon this tactic and try another approach. Investigators began a forensic search of Conahan's financial records. They uncovered purchases of items including tape, rope, knives, pliers, a tarp, and a camera, all items that could have been used in the murders. The time of the purchases also aligned with the times when victims were known to have disappeared. The new evidence allowed police to secure a search warrant. Inside Conahan's home, they discovered a knife, rope, Polaroid pictures, and film. All could have been used in the crimes. They also searched his blue Capri and took paint samples to see if they matched paint chips found on one of the victims. Conahan was questioned and confronted with the evidence. He maintained his innocence, however, and was evasive when questioned. Fibers from the rope retrieved at his home matched fibers found on the victims. Despite this, nothing could definitively tie Daniel Conahan to the crimes. A bulletin was issued to all police departments statewide with details about the crime and the suspect. Officer Pedro Soto saw the bulletin and recalled a prior case he had worked on which included similar details. Soto recalled an incident in which a victim named Stanley Burton was propositioned to pose for nude pictures while tied to a tree. He was attacked but survived to provide the chilling details of this horrific account. Burton was serving time in Ohio at the time and was questioned and presented a picture lineup. He immediately identified Daniel Conahan as his attacker, and on July 3, 1996, Daniel Conahan was arrested for the attempted murder of Stanley Burton. Around the same time, the forensic lab returned a report on the paint chips taken from Conahan's car. It confirmed that the paint chips found on victim Richard Montgomery microscopically matched the paint on Conahan's car exactly.
This allowed investigators to include the charge for the first-degree murder of Richard Montgomery. Throughout the trial, Conahan continued to maintain his innocence, insisting he was being prosecuted because of his sexual orientation.
On August 17, 1999, Judge William Blackwell found Conahan guilty of first-degree murder and a jury sentenced him to death. He is currently waiting on death row in Rayford, Florida. On March 23, 2007, another victim and skeletal remains were found in a wooded area in Fort Myers. Police found no clothing, personal effects, or anything else that might help identify the victim. There were no tracks or other indications that someone had recently visited the area. The medical examiner ruled the death to be a homicide, and an extensive search of the area turned up 7 additional victims. 4 of the victims were unidentified, but the 4 known victims all had lifestyles that matched the known victims of Conahan. Stanley Burton, the star witness at Conahan's trial, was attacked in the same area where these 8 additional victims were found. The case became known as the Fort Myers 8. Conahan was the primary suspect in these murders as well. What do you think? Was Conahan innocent as he claimed? Or is he actually responsible for even more murders yet to be discovered? Let me know in the comments section below. If you have any information regarding this case, let me know as well. References are available in the description. If you enjoyed this video, please click the like button and consider subscribing to the channel. For in case you forgot, I'm Art Intel. Thanks for watching.